Well, welcome back everybody to our online program, and we've been talking about this idea of authorship, which is the idea that regardless of what's going on around me, regardless of my biology or anything else, I'm still the one who's in charge. I'm still the one who has to make decisions that will dictate the kind of life that I live. And as we mentioned, people with addictions really don't understand that concept, because they always position themselves as victims, or they rely on something outside themselves even to feel a certain way. The most obvious example, of course, is drugs, that they will rely on a chemical substance to regulate their mood and their emotions. So people with addictions, it seems to be everything is outside of them. So one of the things we do at the center here is try to help them understand, no, it's all that internal stuff. It's the choices they make, the decisions they make that will dictate the kind of life they have, and not what's going on around them. And one of the best techniques to achieve this authorship is to think about how you make sense of yourself. Or in psychology would say, what is the story you tell yourself about who you are as a person, right? And this idea of story or narrative has become very powerful in psychology. And many psychologists say that we are the stories that we tell ourselves. It is the sort of the story who tell. It's based on the story that we figure out who we are as human beings and what we're doing on the planet and how we interact with other people and how the world works. And this idea of the story, we see it very obviously, for example, in, say, Eric Clapton's autobiography, which is called Clapton. And Eric Clapton, in whatever 40 chapters, will tell us the story of his life. And that story, all the facts may not be there, may not be exactly as he recorded them, but the story is very real. And he brings us through his life in active addiction and his life in recovery. And one of the things that's very noticeable is how he changes how he makes sense of himself from active addiction into recovery. And we see the same thing in many works written by writers who were in active addiction and then got into recovery. In other words, a key piece of recovery is, what is the story you tell yourself of who you are? And does it change from the one that you gave in active addiction? And what we discover in people in active addiction is the story they tell themselves of who they are is things like, well, I'm an addict. So they're going to define themselves in terms of the addiction. Or they'll say, I'm not a very good person. So they look at themselves as sort of less than acceptable, that there's something wrong with them or they need fixing. And this is the story they tell themselves. And what we know from psychology is that you are the story you tell yourself. So if you truly believe that you have no power over anything, that your sort of purpose in life is to use drugs, that you have very low self-confidence and low self-esteem, then that actually becomes your reality. So one of the things we know about being the author of your life is it's much better to write a story of your life which is much more useful to you as a human being, to address, all these things about who you are as a person. Do you believe you're a good person? Do you believe that you are quite capable of doing things? Do you believe that you have the ability to make decisions that will help you? Do you feel you have some control over life? Do you feel that you can achieve things? All of those can become part of this new story, this new authorship, right? And that's why it's so important, and why many psychologists, as I mentioned, say really it's the story that you tell yourself of who you are is really this key piece in authorship. At any rate, something to think about. And that's it for this episode, and we'll be back next time with our last episode on authorship.